Not specific, but general.
Okay.
Okay, Dov? Ready. All right, so it's November 21st, 2010. Here in Jerusalem, interview with Irving Matlow, M-A-T-L-O-W.
Right.
A Machal volunteer for the 1948 War of Independence. Let me ask you first to start with, before you came to Israel, you're a junior in college in Toronto.
Yes.
The thought process of what you're going through to decide, I'm going to go and volunteer in Palestine,
Well,
in Israel.
in Toronto, in about November of 47, there was two representatives from Israel came, and
Shupam? Zivaseder? Or is that? Okay, we'll take two. That's okay, ready?
Yes.
Okay. November 21st, 2010, interview here in Jerusalem with Irving Matlow, M-A-T-L-O-W. Irving, I'd like to begin in the process of you coming to Israel as a volunteer, a Machal volunteer, back in July of 48 when you came, the process that led up to that your coming to Israel.
well, as November of 47, word got around that there was going to be a meeting of war veterans or Jewish war veterans or other people who might be interested in going to Israel to join the army and as a volunteer, because at that time I suppose they anticipated that the birth of the state is not going to be an easy thing, and one would need some trained people, and there was such a need of perhaps of people that I had no military training whatsoever, and the few of us who were at university also had no military training. But the majority of the boys who came, or the men, had been in the Canadian Army, and especially in the Canadian Air Force, and their contribution is recognized that the Air Force in its startup was a lot of foreign fighters and maintenance people, among which were there quite a few Canadians. So we gave our name, and we were called, and we had medical examinations to see if we were fit. I went with a friend of mine, with my best friend. Unfortunately, he didn't pass the medical examinations. And as I mentioned, that most of the boys who were not at college, not at university, they left either at the end of March or the early part of April. But since we were in the midst of the university, they were kind enough to let us finish that year, and there were 5 of us who left Toronto to go to New York and then make our way to Israel. So it took us about 6 weeks between the time we left Toronto till we arrived in Israel, which was around July the 12th in 1948.
What inspired? So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. What was your motivation, and where did that motivation to come from?
Well, I came from a family of longtime Zionists. Even my grandfather in White Russia was a Zionist. There's a family story that he wanted to bring the family here on one of those setups, kind of that there are people who offer to build a house for you and have it all prepared, and then when you make Aliyah, you have some place to go to. Unfortunately, the First World War came and destroyed the family's wealth, and my father, being the oldest one, was the first one to come to Canada. But Canada for him and for my father and for my mother were what we used to call the prose door, the corridor to come to Israel, which they finally realized their dream, and they came here in 55. So that was the family background. My father could read Hebrew, could speak Hebrew. My grandfather was a traditionalist, but as a Zionist, he was modern. So it was quite within the family history, the family views that I joined, gave my name, and followed it through.
They weren't concerned and worried that you might be going off to war and not come back.
Well, they were in a bind, as a lot of people here have to face that bind. In all truth, my mother came to New York when I was waiting there before we took the boat to France, and asked me, to change my mind. But like you'd go after things calmed down a bit. And as a matter of fact, when on the boat to France, there was an Israeli couple who said they left their children in the States, so they'll come back to Israel after things quieten down. But I'm not one to change my mind, and so she couldn't convince me to come back. But I was one of the only Machal boys, I would think, whose parents came to visit them in 1948. Well, my father came in September, and I had just left, let's say, in March, and my mother came in December, and she was here for maybe a month, 6 weeks, when I was in Machanayim, and my father was here for 2-3 weeks in September. Yeah.
From March to July? It took you from March to July, from the time you left Toronto to the time you arrived in Israel?
No.
May.
From May.
From May. Tell me how that worked, what the process was that brought you from Toronto, the steps along the way.
Well, since there were only 5 of us who finished university, and maybe one hadn't been at the university, but for some reason or other he missed maybe the first or the second group, so he went with us. And we went, I think, by train to New York, and they put us up in a hotel. And I think we had the weekend free. That's when my mother came to visit me and tried to convince me to go home. And after a few days, we took the boat that went to Le Havre, France. From Havre, we made our way down to Paris. We stayed overnight in Paris, walked on the Champs-Élysées. And then we took the train to go down to Tretz. Tretz, a lot of people know about Tretz. It was a farm, I think, that they had rented in order to be like a halfway house for younger people, for those who were going to serve in the army, to get a little bit of basic training. I never was that much of an athlete, so when you had to jump like 3 meters from a wall, you had to do it or crawl on your elbows. But I managed to survive that, and then we made our way to Port-au-Bac, I think it is, which is outside of Marseille, and it was on a immigrant ship. So there were a lot of people there. As a matter of fact, from Tretz we went to Grand Arenas. There was a camp right outside of a gathering camp for both refugees, and they went on the boat with us.
Refugees, you're talking about Holocaust survivors?
Yeah, Holocaust survivors. And it was outfitted like it was in a concentration camp, because in the holes was slats. The beds were on boards, and I think we spent the time on deck most of the time because it was impossible to be underneath. But as volunteers, we also had a little to do with preparing the food and looking after things like that. So we were kept busy. And when we came to Israel, as I say, it was in July, when we landed in Haifa, we went down to what was Teledvinsky, and we were sent to the 7th Brigade, to the 72nd of the 7th Brigade, because the 7th Brigade was reorganized then after the debacle at Latrun, and so we got our Aliyah card, our Army card, and we went. Our first camp was in Nesher, outside of Haifa.
Let me back up to Tretz. How long were you there in this training camp?
I think we were in Tretz for about 3 weeks.
And what was the daily routine like?
I can't remember. Maybe there were a little bit of exercises, and then we had to, in the quiet, take a Sten gun apart and try to see if you can put it together with your eyes closed and things like that.
Could you?
I don't know whether I could or not. All I know is that when we were in the camp here, not in Nesher, but in Samaria, we went out to a shooting range for one time, with the gun. I don't think I hit the target once, but that wasn't my function. I was being in the signal corps. All I had to do was carry the walkie-talkie, and that I could do.
This is the first time you were handling a gun, was it not?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What was that like?
I really can't remember, but you do a lot of things when you're in a group. The group does it, and you do it. I'm sure that if I had to shoot a gun for self-protection, I might have done it too. But there's certain things you do under the circumstances that you wouldn't normally do otherwise, And I suppose in the Army, like in an organization, you have a routine you have to follow. You can't just go out on your own and let's say not want to do something that you're ordered to do. So it's discipline is very important.
And your feelings of preparing for war.
Our hearts were young and gay, and it's adventure at the one hand, and you're with the group, and it's very important. And we were quite a very interesting group, the Signal Corps of the 72nd, because we were maybe 30, 35 people of maybe from 25 different countries. The only thing maybe that we had in common was everybody could speak Hebrew. And for that reason, they were sent to the Signal Corps of the 72nd.
Before we get to the Signal Corps, just one last thing on the trip over. On the boats that took you to Haifa.
Yeah.
Do you remember the name of the boat?
Hahar.
Hahar.
Yeah.
Do you know how many survivors, how many Holocaust survivors were on the boat with you? Ship?
No, I don't know that.
Did you have any interaction with them?
Yes, some of them were also on the deck, and like we may have to peel potatoes or do something and serve or something. But outside of that, I think we were, besides the 5 of us, or those for those in Tretz were other volunteers, and some were going to kibbutz or something. So I don't think we had no real interaction with them.
Stories of where they had been, what they had been through?
No.
Did you know enough about the Holocaust at that point?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think maybe we had seen a lot of them in the Grand Arenas, which was interesting because I think half of Grand Arenas was the Anders Army, and half became transit camp for Holocaust survivors. So we had seen them. Maybe we spoke to them there. But
they were referred to as DPs or as refugees?
I can't remember. I wouldn't say.
Now you're coming off the boat in Haifa. You've reached Israel, your first time.
Yeah.
You're 21 years old. You remember that feeling?
Yeah, it was quite an exciting feeling. May I say that I used to put on tefillin, and every morning, even in threats, and I don't know whether I sadly admit it or something, but the day I came to Israel, I didn't put my film on. If I put it on today, it's either for special memorial, Yisker, or something like that, or when I go to a service, they put it on. But
and the reason?
I felt that, that being a nationalist, being in Israel, the land or the atmosphere, I didn't need to have that. I had a bond, let's say, so I didn't need that religious bond. So.
And you had a sense, I finally made it, I'm here.
Yeah, look at it was. I wasn't the first of my family to be here. My uncle had been here in the Gedud Avodah in the 25, 26, and it was hard times for him then. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, and my uncle's mother, she used to write him letters like, "Why should you starve in Israel? Come to Canada, when things will get better, you'll return too." But he only returned for a visit, to visit my parents or something. But it was, something that you've heard of from my grandfather. Had that great aspiration. As a matter of fact, my grandfather came to Israel in 1949. 1950, I think, and it could have been 49. In January, when my mother left, on the same boat that my grandfather came, my mother left, and he spent a year here. But he left my grandmother in Toronto, and the family didn't think it was very nice for an elderly man to be by himself, and the wife, so they sent my grandmother over to see if she liked it here. But look, 1949, 1950 was pretty tough times, and she didn't like it, so he came back. But he dreamt always of returning. And he left his will saying, and he wrote that almost in the month of the Declaration of the Independence of the state in May, that if he didn't manage to see it alive, at least he wanted to be buried here. And it happened, though. He saw it alive. He also was buried here in Bnei Brak. And my grandmother kind of joined him here also in Bnei Brak.
The Signal Corps, your days off the boat, July 12th, 1948.
Yeah.
Tell me what was going on.
Well, I think we were in Teledvinsky. I can't, and I remember that day there was like an air raid siren going up on the top. But we took the friend of mine from Toronto, also was a Hebrew speaking. We went to the same Talmud Torahs, and so the two of us, and I can't remember how many others, were sent up to Nesher, because that's where the 72nd was based, and that's where the signal, our signal unit was based there. And it was, as I said, it was very interesting because we had lots of people, and our commander, the head, was a Major Apple, who was a British officer who decided, for whatever reason it was, and maybe because he had a friend in Haifa, to stay here. And several years ago, I noticed in the paper that he had passed away in Israel, so he remained. And the next in command, let's say, was somebody from Winnipeg, Canadians, and another officer was Canadian from Ontario, not too far away. And then there was people from Bulgaria and Germany and Poland, and one was an Israeli, and Romanian, and one Yemenite and one maybe Iraqi, and so that was interest. Didn't make friends with everybody, but we knew quite enough to see the kibbutz galuyot at that time. Yeah.
Hold on one second. So let me ask you, of all the guys working with you in the Signal Corps, you all spoke Hebrew.
Yes, that was
the only language in common
right,
you all had.
Right, yeah.
What was your specific job in the Signal Corps?
I was attached to the commander, to the captain of the Company B of the 2nd Battalion, who was an American. He was a captain, I think, in the American Army, who spent maybe 2 or 3 years in the Army. And his name was Norman Schutzman. He lives in Delaware, in Wilmington, Delaware. And he says that his father was so angry that he was leaving to go to Israel and facing the possibility of death, that the day that he left to go to New York or something to take the father left early in the morning so as not to see him go. But I'll come back to Norman because we had an incident with him in the fall of 1948 when we were there. So
you're based in Lebanon?
No, we were based in. You want that story?
No. We'll get to know.
No, yeah. So we were in.
You were assigned to him.
In Filon, yeah.
Doing what exactly?
In Filon, there was a little bit of training with the radios and things because we didn't have any training in that. The only thing that we had was Hebrew, and that was basically it because we were getting prepared for what the 72nd and the 75th, the 7th Brigade was supposed to do, and the commander of the 72nd was of the 7th Brigade was Dunkelman, Ben Dunkelman, who was a major in the Canadian Army and supposedly helped open the Burma Road, and there were quite a few Canadians in the whole 77th Brigade, but they didn't want to have everybody together like they would have had maybe a misfortune like in Latrun, and the reaction back home would have been terrible. So they kind of dispersed. So we had in the 72nd there was a group of Yiddish-speaking people, and there were quite a few from England, and I think we had a few from the English-speaking in the 72nd. So while we were in Nesher, I remember once we went across to the Arab village that was Tel Hanan today, which is outside of Haifa, just to throw some hand grenades to see what the reaction is. And but when we got there July, we may have been training for a couple of weeks, and then we had to go up, let's say, to Gesher Haziv because something was going to happen there. But basically, I think it was from. Then we moved to Samaria, which is near Nahariya, south of Nahariya, opposite Lochamei Getaot, and it's there. The big action of the 7th was to go to Operation Hiram to clear out the Galilee, but from the east side, from Tzfat. And the day that we were going to go, or the night we got on the trucks or on the buses, that's when Count Bernadotte got killed, and so the whole operation was scratched. But we went up to Tzfat, and we spent about 10 days in Tzfat before we went back to Samaria.
Can I ask what an average day was like, or no day was average?
I don't know. The time went by. Sometimes I was lucky enough to go pick up the mail, in Akko, and sometimes we had a leave to go into Haifa. It wasn't that far, and when we had the day off, I know that the David Sidorsky, the one that you know and that I had mentioned, he had some friends in Ramat Yochanan, which was the kibbutz just across from Nesher. This is back to Nesher, and one day we went to visit them and cross the fields on the way back because we had those two from the oil refinery, the crackers or something like that, as a guide. But then when we got back to the camp, they said we were crazy because the river, the Kishon, was maybe mined or something, and we shouldn't. But as I say, you do a lot of things then, under the sense of freedom or sense of the atmosphere around it. When you look back, you would never do in a normal life. But
what did you eat?
I think we ate quite well. Anyways, I'm a big bread eater. As long as there's bread, I'm happy. I don't think we had any complaints about the food. I think the army was the first to be looked after with a supply of food. Maybe we didn't have enough meat or something like that out there, but I think we were well fed. And if not, I could have lost some weight then, and I looked. I looked very, very neat and trim, which I haven't been since. So that was one of the positive aspects, but I couldn't keep it on. But the food was not an issue with us. No.
Socializing? Did you meet girls? Did you?
I think only a little later when we had more time off when we went down to Tel Aviv. But not when we were in Samaria or anything like that. Maybe I don't think we had that much time off because we were preparing, I suppose, to go to Tzfat for that Operation Hiram, which we went a little later, and that's when we went, as I mentioned, up into the mountains in the Lebanon. But that.
Were you writing letters home?
Yeah, I have the letter. Well, I'm well. I'm enjoying. Because it's exciting. It's nice to be here. I miss you. I have the letters that I think my parents kept, and I have them in a bundle. Some day I thought I was going to go look over and put them in order and see what I wrote. And sometimes you find out that you wrote something very foolish or something like that. But I know what it is when you're a parent and you get a letter from home. It's from your children, wherever they are, especially when they're far away, how pleased you are. And when you're a grandparent, even all the more so. But you don't usually get these kind of letters from your grandchildren. But no, it's. But the days were filled. The camaraderie that we had. Sometimes we had a day off. I had, from the 2 or 3 people that I got close to in the unit, one was a Yemenite. We once went to visit his family at outside of Petah Tikva, the Iraqi city, and another one was an Israeli here who joined our unit because he had been studying in London, and when he arrived back to Israel, this was the unit that was being replenished, so to speak. And so we visited, and I had some relatives here. My mother had some relatives who I had a base. Both of them were survivors, but she was a nurse in a concentration camp. And if I miss anything that I've lost over the years, is that she had given me a little mezuzah that she had taken off somebody who was dying or dead in the concentration camp, and she gave it to me as being, I forget what the word is. Not a cameo. There's something that would. It's a good luck token, And when we were running the camp in Machanayim, somehow it and my wallet disappeared, and that's one of the things I regret more. That loss is something that bothers me even to this day. But so we had somebody to go, someplace to go to, and then when my grandfather was here for Pesach, I went to have a Seder at their place. Yeah.
Were you ever scared?
I was scared on the first operation, on the second operation of our unit. We went from Tzfat, and then by bus down into the valley to capture Miron, now, which is Yocham Bezakai, is it? And then when I heard the bombs, the shelling, it's the first time I really heard the shelling. So I was a little scared. But the truth was that I really didn't see any real shooting because I wasn't really in the face of fire. But when I was in, I think it was in, maybe it was, I can't remember which one, some of my friend went up to the little triangle into Shfar Am, and they captured the hill, and they were on the top of the mountain, and when the morning came up, there was a counterattack or something, and 5 of the boys were killed at that time. So that was, action that I didn't see, and that was the time that my father was there. I had a cousin of mine by marriage who had served in the army in D-Day and all the rest through Europe, and he said, to give me the best advice, he says, never refuse an order, but never volunteer. And so I maybe followed his advice.
So your unit was the unit that captured Meron?
Yeah. But I think it was quiet there, and because maybe the 79 had come in with one tank or something from elsewhere, so it was quiet. But from there, we went up to, I asked my wife the name. Today it's called Ma'alot, but at that time I think it was Tarshicha and Gush Chalav, that area, and we stayed there, and then we were supposed to go to Sasa, because they were expecting there was something to do with Sasa, and we started walking at night to get to Sasa, and we couldn't get there all at the same time, so we laid down and slept in the open. And so this must have been October, November. And then I remember the biblical quotation which we just read at this time of year about Jacob saying that when he minded the sheep of Pleven, that he sweated during the day and he froze at night. And when I woke up the morning there, my teeth were chattering from the cold. But when we got to Sasa, it had been, all the Arabs had already left. And so we went back, I think, to Sarshicha, and then we went up to the mountain in the Lebanon with the Company B because they were figuring that there was going to be a counterattack there. And as I said, the captain was Norman Schutzman, and the lieutenant was an Israeli boy from Haifa. His name was he was from a Feldman. You know that name? Oh, she gave it. Yeah, thank you. Feldman, and they went out, to going down the hill to see what was happening. And I and the rest of the unit were on the top of the hill. And then there was like a call from the headquarters, what's going on the mountaintop. And so I sent the runner. The captain had a runner attached to him to go to bring orders and things like that. And of interesting as an aside, we had met that runner once we went to a lecture, and sitting beside somebody says, "Are you a machal?" Yes, I was a machal. What unit you were in? The 72nd. What company were you? Company B. What did you do? I was the runner. So I sent the runner, and he came back and he said he couldn't hear anything, couldn't get close enough, he couldn't do anything to find it. So feeling a sense of responsibility, I went to the edge, and I heard that Captain Schutz would say, "Send the machine guns, and I did that. The machine guns came, and they repulsed the attack. But in the meantime, that Lieutenant Feldman had been killed, and Captain Schutzman was said, as he was lying there and the shooting, he was thinking, what will my mother say when she hears that I've been killed? So I had written that up in the 50th. The Federation in Toronto put out a 50th year bulletin or book, and I wrote this up. And then I got from the American Veterans of Israel a little newsletter with a picture of Norman Schutzman and that he had been in Israel. And I said I wanted to check, if my memory was right. So sometimes you say a lot of things that aren't so. So I called the AVI office or something. I wrote them and got his address, and I sent him this, and he confirmed that that's what happened. Yeah, and we've been meeting once a year. They used to come up to Ontario to see the theater, and we've been meeting once a year. With this 2 years, we never managed to coincide our trips. So my wife and I, we went down before we came. Right, us. We went down to visit him in Delaware. He's about 90 years old. He's in better shape than I am. So that's, I think what could have been my major contribution into the as an army and being in the army.
Most of the time, though, you were handling the radios.
Yeah.
In communication from where? Who were you talking to on the radio?
I would think it was the brigade commander, the brigade headquarters of the brigade. But then afterwards, after we, from that Operation Hiram, we were transferred to Filon, which is near Rosh Pina. There's still a camp there, and some of us were and the Mishlatim around there, around the enclave. But I was like in the little headquarters there, to keep control over the the different places of where the soldiers were scattered around that area. So I spent maybe 3-4 weeks in Machamayim, and then 3-4 weeks in Ayelet HaShachar, in a bunker there in the headquarters. And sometimes had to go out and fix the wires because they got cut. And sometimes you had bad experience that somebody got missing all of a sudden. Some English boy got missing from why, how, where, one doesn't know, But
somebody had to go out to go look for him?
Well, they couldn't find him. They didn't, So it was, I remember it was New Year's Eve that we were maybe in Machanayim, and there was English. There's a kibbutz, right? Hanasi, something right by where the Jordan flows into the Kinneret. I forget what, and they had a New Year's party, what they call the Sylvester, and here we are, and it's like as you see in the theaters, here a smiling face, the two faces, one is smiling and one is sad, and here you are in the midst of let's say of the war, so to speak, and there people are celebrating New Year's Eve. We had the same feeling when we were in Nesher, because there were still lights on in Haifa, and we could see the lights, and the light went on in Haifa, and here, the army is, which is the same today. Life continues. The army is one thing, and life goes on.
Are you aware during this time of what's going on in other places of the country? You're getting news about a battle here, won and lost.
I think the only thing David Sidorsky and I, in November, we went down to Beersheba, which had just been captured. Outside of that, things had quietened down pretty well. In January, we're starting the armistice talks. The only thing may have been from Beersheba, they went down Yadin for that road to go down to Eilat, was it, in that period. But outside of that, things were very quiet. There was nothing of any major action going on. I think the concentration was on the roads. I think that's where they had the armistice talks. But at that time, so let's say maybe in May or even earlier, we decided that things were quieting down. So if we weren't going to stay, we were thinking to finish our schooling. So we had to make the plans to go back. So our action, I think, was finished by January, if in the Mishlatim, January, February. The rest of the time, it was...
And your thoughts were to go back, you didn't want to stay?
The thoughts were to go back at least and finish, at that time to come, with the hope of perhaps returning. But as things turn out, sometimes it didn't exactly work out.
Was there any time that you were personally in danger? Danger being a relative term, but...
I don't think so, unless, had I not taken maybe that step on when Norman Schutzman was under fire, and if they would have gone up to the top, who knows what would have happened. It could have been, but that outside of that, I don't think I was really in any danger. Maybe more danger from an accident, of a car accident, or falling off, or something like that. But I things had quietened down right in January.
By January, but I'm talking about the whole from
Yeah.
July till January. You ever thought you're a hero?
No,
Why?
no. Well, look at hero is a big word. I did what I had, my job, my job, and being a responsible, there's certain things you have to do, and sometimes I know I'm better off when things are tougher than when things are easy. And so
Because
maybe it's a nature. Maybe I'm a very staid, maybe conservative individual. Commitment is a commitment, And back home in Toronto, since we did start with a machal group, I thought the only way to keep the group together was to do something for the soldiers, current soldiers, the link. So in Montreal, there was a Wohlgelernter Chayal branch, and I suggested that the boys in Toronto should take it and as a project, and that would keep them going. And it didn't work out, so we spent a year here, 70, 71, I was tired of coming for a week or so. And then after I came back, I was kind of put in charge of the Wohlgelernter in Toronto, and it's still existing, but for the last 10 years I haven't been involved in a great extent. But that we kept it going for 30 years was an accomplishment. So.
Back to the war. Do you ever have occasion to meet any famous Israelis or generals who became famous politicians or something like that during your time? No.
No, I don't think so. I mean, except for Ben Dunkelman, who was the commander, and he may have had access to Ben Gurion and the rest. He came in, and I remember once he said, they owned a very big manufacturing in men's clothing in Toronto, that he would provide employment and everything for the people who were here. It didn't work out. But no, later on, we had as being part of the Wohlgelernter, I met like Weitzman and other people, and all the. I have a book here, Nat Kanir. I don't know if you know the name. He was the head of the Wohlgelernter. He was wounded in '67. His legs were shattered, but he didn't want to have them cut off. So he worked with. I think he rejoined the army after, but he walked with a limp all the time. But, so it's a story, and the other people, famous people, no.
When you look back now at the time you spent, how do you see yourself, your contribution in the bigger picture?
Well, you know what it is. For lack of a nail, there was not the horse that did not get his shot for the. Everybody contributed. I think that in Canada, the boys who were in the Air Force contributed a lot more. But maybe we contributed something in a spiritual, in a more sense that all Kol Yisrael Chaverim, and that if people who left good, comfortable homes and didn't have to come to Canada, to Israel, to fight and perhaps risk their lives. So there's something special about them, and maybe special about the Jewish people. And in that way, maybe we helped a little bit of the morale of anybody who we met, and because I think we were very much appreciated for coming at that time. And the incident in Lebanon with if he felt that I saved his life, and maybe other ones too. So that was my contribution. I did my job as a radio operator, and I enjoyed it, and I think I was of a certain help. It's made a certain contribution, but I think I got more from the experience than I could have. I got as much, let's say, from the experience as I contributed, and it's one of the highlights of my existence, of my lifetime. So I'm pleased I came. I know my parents were joyed that I returned in one piece. I don't know I don't know whether I've considered the risk, because sometimes if you do, you don't do a lot of things. But it worked out well. And things, we followed the growth over the years. We've had this house for 25 years. We visited my folks 50 years ago. So we've seen the development. We've seen the progress, the good, mostly the good. Certain things that are not to what we expected, but all in all.
When you say you were appreciated, what would the Israelis, the natives here from the Yishuv, what would they say to you as the volunteers coming to help?
I don't know whether they ever, maybe the odd one who gave us a lift or picked us up or hitchhiking or something like that when they saw we were from Canada and that we had come here, would be very hospitable to us, invite us in to their house to come and so in that way, I know that, as I mentioned, my relative, the one who gave me the Magen David, she looked upon me as somebody really special who had come from the good, safe country to come to Israel. So, and with my grandfather, where he lived in a religious house, I think everybody who we didn't come in contact with too many people, but everybody that we did come in contact to showed a certain sense of appreciation and gratitude for that we were here at that historical moment.
When you try and explain to the youth today what it was like then, what do you see that they really have no understanding, that they don't get what it was like back then? Well, for one thing, the country is not the historical moment of that it was in 47, 48 is a historical moment that you live through, but you can't perhaps
transmit it in the same sense. You know, the 47 November is the United Nations. That period, the period before the state was declared, So you can't make them have the same sense. How do you give them another feeling? I don't know whether you can make them feeling of what was, but I think one has to try and give them a sense of what can be. You know, what if they want to participate in some great adventure of the Jewish people? It's still not finished. It's still in the process, and that's kind of move them emotionally in that way to participate. You know, that they can make their contribution in a different way than they could make it in, let's say, in 48 or 49. But and maybe people won't appreciate it as much today as they may have done in 60 years ago. But you do certain things for yourself and for your people, if you're close to, and for the state of Israel, which is kind of the people in a form, in a state, in existence that it can, it's like the collective of the people of the state of Israel. And if you've been brought up in a little traditional home, so you still have Kimitzion Tetzei Torah, that you still hope that there'll be greater contributions to the world that are happening in Israel, except making the cell phones and things like that.
1 second. Interview with Irving Matlow on tape 2. Interview with Irving Matlow on November 21st, 2010. You were talking about transmitting the idea of helping the country, helping the Jewish people, doing what you need to do to help. Certainly when this was going on from July of 48 till 49, you certainly were aware that you were participating in history at the highest level of participation of Jewish history.
Right.
Correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's true. So, I mean, if you know Jewish history, you know the 2,000 years approximately not having a state, and you have a declaration of first independent state in 1900 years. It is a historical moment, and hopefully it's a lasting historical moment.
How difficult, therefore, following that, to go back to Toronto, to go back to school, how difficult was to integrate back into Canadian society after having participated in major history?
Well, I was always involved in the Jewish community when we were at the university with the Hillel. So, and I had intentions of returning, but unfortunately, had I been serious, I would have taken some trade that would have prepared one to come to Israel, because my forte, or what I learned, I don't think would have my commerce and finance, or what I had taken at the university, I don't think would have allowed me to find a position or do something here.
But on a conceptual level, do you ever regret having not made Aliyah?
At a certain age, you know, regretting is not very helpful. I may have regretted it, but at a certain age, you regret it. Let me say, my son, as I mentioned, is a collector of Herzl memorabilia, and he celebrated his 50th birthday and wanted the whole family to come to Basel. We all went to Basel. And he has a display at the synagogue of the Beth Tzedek, and he speaks to groups. And he gives a message that basically it's up to you to do the things, you know. Im tirtzu ein zu agada. And it's up to the individual to do the things in his life that he wants. So if he didn't do it, it's because he didn't do it, and one shouldn't kind of look back and regret. Yeah.
When you look back at 62 years of Israeli history, you come here now, having come here then, what is the biggest change that you see that you just still can't believe has happened?
Well, I think the biggest change is the amount of building, the growth, the physical growth, and the economic growth of the country. I mean, who would have thought that Tel Aviv would be such a big city? Jerusalem is a big city, but you know, it hasn't got the vibrancy, I don't think, of Tel Aviv. As they say, it's two different countries, right? And we chose to come to Jerusalem because we were still traditional in its Zion, right? But I don't think we really regret it. But since I speak Hebrew, I can attend lectures in Hebrew. If you're an English-speaking person, it's not as easy, I think, to be in Jerusalem for cultural things. You know, most things are bivrit, and you know, so that is one of the major things: the population growth, the economic growth, the physical growth, the scientific developments in the state of, so in that way it's a remarkable. When I used to speak on behalf of the soldiers, I would say that it's of all the countries that were created after the Second World War, Israel is a success story, and it is a success story. There are certain things that unfortunately have not transpired that one thought would be in 48, 49, you know, that the armistice would lead to peace, and then would be a different political situation in that way, in the peaceful way. But I don't think people could imagine that the country would have grown to the state that it is over the past, let's say, even the 30 years. I mean, the housing that they're building today, or that you can buy if you have the means. I mean, when we bought this house here, I mean, central air conditioning, who would have even thought of putting it in there? You know, kitchens except for Regba or something. Who would have thought those Italian kitchens or German kitchens and all that thing? So that way, but because maybe I'm a little on the leftist side. There's certain things that kind of bother me, and maybe it's because I don't live in the country, you know, and so you know, if you live in a place that doesn't have these problems, you really can't appreciate what it is with the problems.
What were your politics back then as a Machal volunteer? Do you remember?
Apolitical.
Apolitical. You'd have discussions among the group?
I don't think there was I don't think we discussed any politics. I don't know whether people discussed politics there at that time.
But the country was then having just been formed with a divide between the Ben Gurion and Begin and
When? Not that much in 48, 49? I don't think so. I don't think there was.
No, before that. I'm saying it was coming out of that. From 44, 45, 46, 47.
Yeah.
The country was divided between those two camps.
Yeah.
Did not affect?
No, I don't think. I don't think that it was divided in any way like that in 48, 49. We had some people. One of the boys came back from Eritrea. He was a Eitzelnik or Lechinik and something like that. Other ones, I don't, these, maybe the person from Iraq was a little on the right more. I think he went into Jaffa and took an apartment or something at that time. But for the most part, I don't think we've ever talked about the party in politics, the party in power, the party in this and that. Maybe we had not much to do with any bureaucracy, if there was any bureaucracy there. So we are not. We didn't come in contact that. If any bureaucracy that we came in contact, that was only helpful and only considerate. And our experience, maybe because we didn't need any financial help from the state. Our experiences has been very positive with the bureaucracy here. When we were here for the year 1970-71, we sent a whole lift, because with furniture, with bedding and everything. And my wife met somebody in the Ministry of the Interior who treated her wonderfully because she was a friend of, she was active in Hadassah and he gave her a special visa. So we were always very pro. We had no complaints about bureaucracy.
And what were the dreams that you all talked about as soldiers?
I don't know whether people talked about dreams.
You're building a state. The state's been declared in May. It's not even half a year old.
I know, but at that time, I don't think we had any political discussions. No,
Social discussions.
I don't
The
think.
country. What will be the state of Israel?
I think no, I don't think there were. I can't remember. I think that the people who came, who were new arrivals, were just interested in establishing themselves and finding a place to live and finding a job to do, and if they had their families, how to support their families. And I don't think that there was anybody who said, well, I'm a revisionist, I want to have Begin or something in power. I don't think. I think that at that time there were more important issues. Solidarity always comes out right when there's an outside danger. I once took a course, the importance of social conflict or something that binds the people together, and so you always have to have somebody outside as a threat if you want to have unity. And I think that's, at that time, it was still, as long as we were here, maybe till April, there was still the threat. So there was social unity. There was the unity. Nobody, I can't remember my friend's brother was a Shomer Hatzoyer. Chatzor was a Shomer Hatzoyer kibbutz. I don't think we ever had it that he said, you know, Shomer Sawyer is the best. He was happy working, doing his, being there. And other people, I don't think there were any, there wasn't anybody from the kibbutz, I don't think, with us in that unit. So everybody was thinking perhaps of their own future. You know, so they want to be a lawyer, or they want to do this, do that.
And you finally left in
May
49.
May of 49.
What led up to that?
As I said, I think I mentioned, it was nice, it was quiet here. The armistice had taken place. There was no need for us in the army anymore.
Not in the fighting sense, but did your commanding officers not say, maybe you should stay and help us?
No. I mean, it was, the feeling, I suppose, was that peace would be in the offing, right? The armistices were the first step to peace. And that those who wanted to go home, and there weren't that many, right? There weren't, I think, I don't know how many volunteers all told, 3,000 volunteers. Canada, I think, had a very good number, maybe had a couple of hundred volunteers from Canada. So the 3,000, except for the Air Force, and by that time, there were some native Israelis who were pilots. And the first Squadron 101, we had met one of the pilots, Lou Leonard. I don't even know the name Lou Leonard. He was one of the American pilots, and a couple of them were South African pilots. The only Israeli pilot was Ezer Weitzman at that time. But then, I suppose, by the time April, May came around, there was enough Israeli-born pilots to fill the ranks. So, and that may be the same. We weren't specialists. Maybe if we were specialists, that we had a vital role, a tank, let's say, driving a tank or something, or fixing a tank, and there weren't as yet Israelis who could take that position, that job. Maybe they would have asked you to stay a little longer. But I think that they changed the 72nd after a while. They made it into an armored unit, right? And some of the units, the Givati, they disbanded completely. So it meant that they didn't think that they would need to have the manpower that they had at that time.
Do you remember the first time you came to Jerusalem?
I came to Jerusalem with my father in September of 1948. And my father managed to get 2 tickets to come on the bus to go by the Burma Road to come to Jerusalem. And we stayed, I think, not too far from where we're living now. There was, I think, a pension, a Fishkin, or one of those places there. And we had I remember the walls that at the end of the streets of the Sharim, and water being distributed by tanks. Yeah. So that was my first experience in Jerusalem. Then I came after.
What was the Burma Road like?
The Burma Road was interesting because, you had to go down, and they had what they used to put on the Air Force bases or something to give traction or something permanent to go the hills. And this Ben Dunkman was supposedly the one who found that Burma road. I don't think we never went back on the Burma road, but now you can go, I think, on it, and we know where it comes out on where you started and go out. But look, we've been to Israel over the years. That this we used to go through Abu Ghosh, this village, to get here, or we used to go through Eshtaol or the other thing. So we never had highway number one.
Was there a spot that you could go to look out towards the old city?
We did in 52.
No, I meant in 48.
40,
Your father was here.
I don't. No, I don't think so. No, in 52, I think to Abu Tor we went there. There was a place, but I don't think we saw. I don't think there was a place that we could glance over the Jerusalem. No. And we were here maybe for 3 days or something like that. And we had some relatives we found in Meir Sharim. But no, I wasn't in Jerusalem too often. I was more in Tel Aviv, I think. Especially when my grandfather was there. We had kind of a rapport, because we had maybe the same outlooks at one time. He would confide in me. He confided that his dream was to return, which never happened. But that's also water under the history. And
is there anything I've missed in the story that you wanted to tell me, or a story that you know, Esther, that he would tell?
About my experiences in Israel.
No, during the war specifically.
I don't think so. We were here for the first Independence Day in Tel Aviv, where they were supposed to have the parade, which never took place. I remember that I had climbed up a tree to see what was going on, and it didn't happen. Oh. We had the relatives that we went to visit who always treated us nicely, and as I said, that's what I do regret, that the loss of that item, because other things you can replace, but it was such a deed, I suppose it was dangerous for the person to take it off a body and hide it, and then to give it to me, as a good luck charm. But I think I've had good luck without it, so but it's still sorry that you don't have it. It was, to sum it up, the years have gone by. We've been attached always to the state of Israel. Our children are pretty well also speak Hebrew. They're all Jewishly minded, Jewishly conscious. We're traditional in conservative in what that means in religious practice. But we can be proud that all our kids speak kosher in the home. All our grandchildren went to day school education. And all of them have visited Israel, been to Israel. My son's children have been here. Well, the oldest one is 21. She may have been here 20 times already. So that's the continuity that we have, and hopefully that will continue in the generations to come.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Okay.